The gate wasn't just locked. It was sealed, chained, and branded with a bright red tag that fluttered in the late afternoon wind like a warning flag. Calvin Rourke stared at it for a long minute, standing perfectly still on the gravel trail that led to the cabin he'd built with his own hands. The tag read, "Restricted Access. Property in violation of HOA regulations. Trespassing will result in legal action." He reached out slowly, touching the metal lock. It was new, shiny. Someone had been here recently, and they hadn't bothered to contact him. His first thought wasn't confusion. It was something colder, familiar. A quiet sense of dread creeping into his bones. He hadn't felt it since the military. Back then, he'd called it instinct. Now it whispered another word: setup. He stepped back, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved except pine needles rustling in the late summer breeze. No cars, no footprints in the dirt, but someone had been here, and they'd come with intent. Calvin pulled out his phone. No missed calls, no texts, no warnings. The land stretched. Behind the gate, nearly 5 acres of sloping pine forest, ending in a ridge where his cabin overlooked the lake. He had bought this land 7 years ago, just outside the reach of Wild Pines Estates, a detail he'd confirmed twice during the original purchase. He'd gone off-grid on purpose. No neighbors, no streetlights, no HOA, and now this. He stared at the gate again, then at the thin, barbed boundary fence nearby, marked faintly with a worn metal sign, property line. Wild Pines. A flicker of doubt entered his mind. Had the line changed? Could it? He turned around and trudged back to his truck, parked off, the access road a few yards down. As he opened the door, he noticed something else. A tire track, deep and clean in the gravel, next to where his truck had pulled in. Someone had parked here, recently. He took out his phone again and snapped a picture. Something about this wasn't just off. It was calculated. Someone had made a move while he was away, and they were counting on him being too isolated, too quiet, too disconnected to fight back. They didn't know Calvin Rourke. He tossed the phone into the passenger seat and started the engine. The rumble broke the silence of the woods, but his mind was already racing ahead. First stop, the Wild Pines HOA office. Someone had answers. Someone had signed off on this, and they were about to find out exactly who they were messing with as he backed out. A glint in the mirror caught his eye, up the trail, near the tree line. A flash of movement, too low for a bird, too quick for wind. He stopped the truck. Nothing. He waited a full 10 seconds, scanning the shadows, until finally shifting back into drive. But the feeling stayed. That prickle on the back of his neck. Like he wasn't just being watched, like he was being hunted. He drove away slowly, dust rising behind him, and never saw the small drone nestled in the upper branches of the pine above. The locked gate, its lens still trained on the back of his truck, blinking silently in record mode. The HOA office sat at the edge of the Wild Pines Community Center, a pristine white building that looked more like a country club than an administrative office. Inside, it was even worse. Glass walls, polished floors, fake smiles, the kind of place that whispered civilized tyranny. Calvin stepped through the front doors and immediately felt out of place. He wore mud-streaked boots, a flannel shirt still, smelling faintly of sawdust, and a frown that refused to leave his face. Behind the front desk sat a young receptionist with perfect eyeliner and zero curiosity. "Can I help you, sir?" "I need to speak to the HOA president," Calvin said, voice like gravel. "Now!" The girl blinked once, clicked something on her screen, and then offered a bright, rehearsed smile. "You must be Mr. Rourke. Ms. Vexler will see you. Upstairs." He stiffened. She knew I was coming. The second-floor office was glass-walled, too, but the blinds were drawn shut. As the door opened, Calvin stepped into a room that smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and control. Miranda Vexler stood with her back to him, watching something on a wall-mounted monitor, security footage. She turned slowly, her heels precise. Against the floor, tall, late 40s, dark suit, eyes like polished steel. "Mr. Rourke," she said, walking to the desk and gesturing to the empty chair. "We've been expecting you." He didn't sit. "You locked me out of my own land." She nodded. "That's correct. No notice, no email, no contact." "You think that's legal?" Miranda folded her hands on the desk, posture perfect. "We don't believe it's your land, Mr. Rourke. According to the updated parcel records, your cabin lies within a restricted HOA zone, originally marked for environmental preservation. Your structure violates that clause." Calvin pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket and dropped it on her desk. "That's my deed. County registered. Includes coordinates, full plot lines. That land was never HOA. I verified it twice before I built." She didn't even glance down. "We've updated the boundaries since then," she said calmly. "The HOA voted in new perimeter protections last year. Your structure now falls under our jurisdiction." "Last year?" Calvin's voice rose. "I've lived in that cabin for 3 years." Miranda's lips barely moved. "Unfortunately, legacy placement doesn't guarantee grandfathering, especially if the structure in question was," she smiled faintly, "never formally disclosed." He stared at her, blood rising. "I submitted permits, construction notices. I did everything by the book." "You submitted them to the county, but you never submitted them to us." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "And as of now, your access is suspended pending a compliance hearing. If you continue to access the structure, we'll have no choice but to pursue legal enforcement." Calvin said nothing. Miranda stood and walked slowly toward him, heels clicking like clockwork. "I admire your craftsmanship, by the way. The drone footage shows excellent work. You even built the window trim by hand. Very quaint." She paused. "But Wild Pines is growing, Mr. Rourke. The board has plans. And your cabin, charming as it is in the way." He stared at her, in disbelief. "You're serious?" Deadly. Calvin turned without a word and left the office. As the door clicked shut behind him, Miranda returned to her monitor. The drone footage rewound. There he was again, Calvin, stepping out of his truck, looking at the locked gate. Zoom, enhance, freeze frame, a close-up of his face. Miranda stared at it for a long moment before tapping a finger on the screen. "You should have stayed off the grid, Calvin," she whispered. Calvin slammed the cabin blueprint box onto his dining table, the metal corners of it screeching against the old oak surface. Dust puffed out like it had been waiting to exhale. He hadn't opened this box in years, not since the final nail. Went into the cabin's porch railing. Inside were maps, deeds, permits, every scrap of paperwork he had collected to make sure his land, his build, his entire life out here, was legal. He unfolded the original surveyor's map, dated and stamped by the county clerk. The lines were clear. Plot Bur 47AB, 4.97 acres, outside the boundary of Wild Pines Estates. He'd even measured the tree line himself, back when the only thing on this land had been snow and silence. But when he pulled out the copy Miranda had slid across her desk earlier, folded neatly into the violation packet, he didn't bother reading until now. His stomach sank. The boundaries were off, just slightly, by about 60 feet, enough to place the cabin's front porch and the entire eastern half of his land within Wild Pines' control, just enough to change everything. The lines weren't just redrawn, they were manipulated. Calvin didn't sit. He paced, holding one map in each hand, moving between them like a man caught between mirrors. Everything matched except for that subtle, eastward shift in Miranda's version. but it was enough to give her legal leverage, or at least the appearance of it, and appearances were often all an HOA needed to ruin you. He grabbed a magnifying glass and examined the fine print on her map. The ink was fresh. The signature at the bottom, someone named C. Walters, Land Planning Consultant, was new. He didn't recognize the name from any of the original documents. Calvin ran his thumb along the corner. There, barely visible, was a date, January 8th. Less than 6 months ago, she'd redrawn the boundary map after he built the cabin. That's when a new realization crept in. Miranda knew about his cabin for months and had waited until she had the paperwork redone. Waited until the legal lines were just right. Then she struck. It wasn't about a violation. It was a land grab. He grabbed his phone and called the county recorder's office. Wild Pines boundary records, he said when someone answered. I need the original zoning map for parcel 47AB, pre-realignment. There was a pause. Then, sir, those records have been flagged for administrative review. They're restricted for the next 90 days. Calvin's grip tightened. Who? Flagged them? Wild Pines Homeowners Association submitted the request. Click. He hung up, heart pounding. They weren't just locking him out of his cabin. They were scrubbing the record of him ever owning it. He dropped into the chair, the weight of realization hitting him square in the chest. Miranda hadn't overstepped. She had planned this, calculated it. And now, with the maps rewritten, the permits under dispute and the official records under review, she was closing the legal trap. It would be her word against his, unless... His eyes shifted toward the small filing cabinet near the fireplace. One drawer, still locked. He hadn't opened it in years. Inside, if it was still there, was the flash drive from his original contractor. Site photos, drone footage, GPS coordinates stamped by time and location. The kind of metadata that couldn't be erased by slight. Of hand or reprinted maps. If the HOA wanted to play with lines, he'd show them something they couldn't redraw. He walked over, knelt down, and twisted the key into the lock. It opened with a click, but the drawer was empty. Calvin stood in stunned silence, staring at the empty drawer. The flash drive, his insurance, was gone. Not misplaced, removed. He hadn't opened that drawer in over 3 years. The key had never left his ring. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no scuffed floors. But someone had been inside. He locked the drawer again on instinct, though it was pointless now, and walked slowly to the front door. From the porch, he scanned the woods. The sun had dipped behind the trees, and the pines swayed gently in the wind like 1,000 silent watchers. For the first time in years, the cabin didn't feel like a sanctuary. It felt like a trap. He grabbed his flashlight, a heavy-duty beam he used for night hiking, and decided to retrace the back trail toward the cabin's perimeter. If someone had gotten in, they hadn't come through the main gate. They'd used the woods. 20 minutes later, the moon lit up the clearing that wrapped behind his cabin. Calvin stopped near the ridge just beyond the bluff where he sometimes set up campfires. From here, the cabin looked peaceful. Timber-framed, dark roof angled like a ship's prow, porch light casting soft gold onto the dirt path. Then he noticed. The camera mounted discreetly under the eave just above the front door. It hadn't been there before. His stomach turned. He circled around carefully, keeping to the shadows, and spotted a second device, smaller, newer, tucked beneath the back porch railing. Not motion sensors, not part of his own setup, surveillance. He hadn't been paranoid. He'd been monitored. Something buzzed in the back of his mind. He'd seen one of those before, in Miranda's office. The footage, the drone. She'd said it showed his craftsmanship. She hadn't meant aerial views. She'd been watching him inside the cabin. He returned indoors, heart racing now, and swept through the rooms with growing urgency. Every corner, shelf, beam. He found a third camera hidden inside a wooden beam casing in the kitchen, a hole no bigger than a dime. The lens blinked once before going dark. He grabbed it and yanked. Wires snapped. Then he pulled the others, ripping cords, tossing devices onto the floor like he was exercising something unnatural. When he finished, he stood among the wreckage, his safe haven exposed, violated. Miranda hadn't just redrawn the map. She'd infiltrated his home, and that meant she wasn't operating alone. Someone with technical access, surveillance-grade gear, installation skills, system knowledge had to be helping her. A memory surfaced from years ago. During construction, the original electrical inspector had been overly chatty, asking questions about utilities and future renovations. At the time, Calvin had chalked it up to nosiness. Now, he wasn't so sure. He checked the fuse box in the basement. A small black module was wired in near the breaker, a relay, a transmission point. It hadn't been there before. They'd wired the cabin, maybe months ago, maybe longer, which meant every conversation, every visit, every moment of privacy had never really been private. His skin crawled. Suddenly, his phone vibrated in his back pocket. One message, unknown number, no name, just 6 words. You should not have come back. His blood froze. The phone slipped from his hand and hit the floor. He didn't pick it up. The next morning, Calvin left the cabin early, just after sunrise. He took the back roads, keeping off the main drive that led to the community gates. Wild Pines wasn't just a name anymore. It was a machine, and he was finally beginning to see its gears. He parked 2 blocks from the main clubhouse and walked the rest of the way on foot, using the quiet to observe. Every house looked the same. Neat hedges, painted shutters, security cams angled discreetly above garage doors. But the sameness wasn't just visual. It was behavioral. People watched from windows. He could feel it. The curtain dips, the stillness. Like the entire neighborhood had been trained to pretend nothing was happening, even when it was. He stopped in front of House 112, the home of Nora Kensington. She'd been one of the original residents, a retired school teacher who used to host weekend knitting circles before the pandemic. She was also the only board member to vote against Miranda Vexler's presidency last year. Calvin rang the bell, once, then again. Finally, the door cracked. Nora peered through the gap like she was peeking out from behind enemy lines. "Calvin," she whispered, "what are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you. About Miranda. About my cabin." She hesitated, then opened the door just enough for him to step inside. The moment it closed behind him, she turned and locked 3 bolts. "You shouldn't have come," she said sharply. "You're already marked." "I know," he replied. "They bugged. My cabin. Took my flash drive. They redrew the landlines." Nora flinched. "I warned you back when you started building. Told you to get it in writing. Notarized." "I did. They still changed it." She walked to the kitchen, made tea with trembling hands. "Miranda's not just the HOA president. She's a proxy, a fixer. For who?" Nora looked up slowly. "Developers." That landed like a punch. "She's been clearing land for 2 years, Nora continued. "Anyone who resists gets buried in paperwork, violations, fines, lawsuits. Then they settle, or leave, or," her voice dropped, "sell cheap. And the board lets this happen? They're paid," she said flatly. "Some get bonuses. Some get preferred contractor deals. Others, just silence. Fear. Do you know how many security cameras she's installed? How many homes she can see inside?" Calvin leaned forward. "What about the map? Who redrew it?" Nora hesitated. "I don't know who did it. But it wasn't her. She doesn't do details. She gives orders, plays innocent, then wipes her hands clean. She's got someone inside the county office. That's how she got the parcel frozen." Calvin's heart sank. It was worse than he'd thought. Corruption at the HOA was expected. But to infiltrate local government? She wants my land, he said. She said my cabin's in the way. Nora handed him the tea. Her hand brushed his, cold and shaking. She wants the ridge, she whispered. It's part of Phase 4. They want to build a private helipad. You think it's about your porch? No, it's about what's under it. That stopped him. What's under it? Nora looked up at him. Her eyes had gone pale with fear. You don't know? She said. You built over it and you don't know? Calvin's voice was steady. Know what? She took a deep breath, then whispered, There's a sealed shaft beneath that ridge. It's not on any maps, but the HOA's been after it since before Wild Pines was even built. He stood there, pulse pounding, the tea in his hand going cold. Suddenly, outside the window, a black SUV crawled by slowly. Tinted windows. No plates. Nora saw it too. Her voice dropped to a whisper. They're watching me now. That night, Calvin didn't sleep. Nora's words replayed in his head like a ticking metronome. A sealed shaft beneath the ridge, not on any maps, something the HOA had been circling for years, and he'd built a cabin right over it. At 3:17 a.m., he stood in his shed, lantern glowing weakly against the darkness, holding a shovel in one hand and a crowbar in the other. The floorboards in the back of the cabin, the ones near the old root cellar, were loose by design. He'd always intended to finish the crawl space but never got around to it. Now, it felt like the only place no one else had eyes on. He pried up the floorboards slowly, every creak sounding like a gunshot in the stillness. Beneath the boards was compacted dirt, untouched since he moved in. He tested the ground with his boot. Solid, but not stone. He began to dig. The shovel bit into the earth with a satisfying crunch. He worked in silence, sweat beading on his brow despite the cool air. Foot by foot, the hole deepened. About 2 hours in, the dirt changed. Softer, looser, almost filled. Then he hit it. Clang, metal. He dropped to his knees and brushed the soil away with his hands. What emerged looked like the top of a manhole, about 3 feet wide, partially, encased in old concrete. It was rusted but intact, stamped with a faded emblem, USGS, restricted access. U.S. Geological Survey. He leaned in. No lock, just a rusted wheel valve in the center. Calvin hesitated. Every instinct screamed, don't. But instincts had already failed him once. He gripped the valve and turned. It shrieked in protest but gave way slowly, layers of rust crumbling to dust. The seal cracked open with a hiss, the smell of stale earth and something far colder rising from the shaft. He shone his flashlight down. Ladder rungs descended into darkness, at least 30 feet down, maybe more. And beyond that, walls of smooth, finished concrete. Not just a hole, not a well, a constructed shaft. He lowered himself carefully onto the first rung, boots slick with dirt, down rung by rung until the air grew cooler, deader. At the bottom, he stepped into a narrow corridor, walls smooth, dry, almost surgical. The flashlight flicked across faded hazard symbols and broken wiring conduits. Some kind of bunker. A test site? Military? Then he found the plaque, half covered by dust. Sublevel Beta 6. Entry restricted. Energy study sector. Calvin stared at it, breath catching. What the hell was this? His flashlight flickered once, then again. Footsteps above. He killed the light instantly. He listened, frozen, heart racing. Then a voice, muffled, female, calm, crisp. He's in. Prep the seal. No contact. Let him see it. It was Miranda. He crouched back against the shaft wall, eyes adjusting, pulse thundering in his ears. Let him see it. He wasn't meant to be stopped. He was being lured. A test subject? A scapegoat? He looked deeper into the corridor. A faint glow illuminated the far end. a cool, unnatural blue. A hum vibrated beneath the floor, like something very old had just remembered it was alive. He had two choices: climb back up and risk running straight into Miranda's trap, or go deeper and find out what they'd built wild pines around. He took one step forward, then another. Calvin moved cautiously through the subterranean corridor, the strange blue light drawing him like a moth to a flame. The air grew heavier with every step, humming with something unnatural. This wasn't just a sealed shaft, it was a forgotten facility, alive in some slumbering mechanical way. The walls pulsed faintly. Once white, now gray and vein-streaked with corrosion and mineral rot. He passed shattered control panels and warped glass, their labels long faded. Magnetic containment, level B6, EM flux stabilizer. No unauthorized entry. Then he reached the source of the glow. A chamber opened in front of him, circular, domed, and impossibly vast for something hidden beneath a small mountain ridge. The center of the room held a glass-walled core, cracked in places but still intact. Inside, a spinning, suspended mass, shifting, humming, alive. It wasn't machinery. It wasn't natural. It was something in between. As Calvin approached, he felt a static pressure building in his ears, like his body recognized this thing shouldn't exist. Blue arcs of energy flickered through the core, casting his shadow across the metal walls. There was no heat, yet his skin itched. Every hair on his arm stood upright. Mounted beside the core was a terminal, old but active. Green text scrolled across the screen like a heartbeat monitor. Status: stable, 89.3% integrity. Reactivation initiated, Phase 1 project. Fusion. Site: Beta. 6 authorized, M. Vexler. His throat went dry. Miranda wasn't just trying to acquire his land. She was trying to activate something buried beneath it. Suddenly, a door slid open behind him. Calvin spun. A figure stepped out from the darkness. Thin, pale, wearing a patch-covered lab coat faded from time. His voice came out like dust and warning. "You shouldn't be here," the man rasped. "You're too early." Too early for what? The man tilted his head. "Containment was meant to last another 5 years. Your presence is accelerating. Instability." Calvin took a step back. "Who are you?" The man blinked slowly. "I was the lead scientist for Project Fusion. Name doesn't matter anymore. They left us here to die. Me and the other technicians. When it malfunctioned, when it opened, they buried it." "Opened?" Calvin asked. "Opened what?" The man nodded toward the core. "It's not from here. Not exactly. It came through, or was pulled through. The early test, pure energy extraction, went wrong. It didn't just give power, it absorbed everything. Light, heat, thought, people." He looked at Calvin. "It remembers. The walls around them groaned, soft metallic echoes rippling through the chamber like a storm beneath the surface. "Miranda wants to wake it," the man whispered. "She thinks it's a power source, but it's not. It's a gate. One that's been leaking for years." Calvin's breath caught. "That hum in the trees, the weird interference, bleed," the man said. "Dimensional residue. You've felt it, haven't you? The wrongness, the déjà vu, the dreams." Calvin nodded slowly. The man stepped closer, voice urgent now. "If she completes reactivation, the gate will open fully. And this time, it won't. Just drain the town. Then help me shut it down." The man's face twisted into a grimace. "You think I haven't tried? Every attempt destabilizes the core. There's only one way to stop it now." A pause. "You have to destroy the ridge, the entire structure. From the surface." Calvin stiffened. "My cabin?" "Yes," the man said. "It's the keystone. Your foundation cuts through the last structural buffer. The only thing keeping the gate in partial stasis. That's why she wants it cleared. Calvin looked up toward the ceiling. Above them, trees swayed innocently in the wind. His sanctuary was sitting on the edge of an abyss. Suddenly, the terminal beeped. Phase 2 initiated. Full reactivation in 24 hours. The countdown had begun. Calvin sprinted up the ladder. Every second ticked louder in his head as the countdown echoed in his memory. That was 5 hours ago. He emerged into the crawl space, filthy and shaking, adrenaline drowning every rational thought. This wasn't just a land dispute anymore. Not some HOA power grab. It was the end of something. Maybe everything. And he was the hinge it all turned on. He burst into the main room of the cabin, grabbed the emergency sat phone from the drawer, and dialed the only person he thought might still help. Nora. She picked up on the first ring. "They're evacuating people," she said breathlessly before he could speak. "Something about a gas leak. But it's not just a drill. Miranda's. People are moving equipment into the woods, vans, generators. It's real," Calvin said. "There's something under the ridge. A gate. They're powering it up." He paused. "I have to destroy it." Silence. Then, "What do you need?" "Dynamite, or fertilizer explosives, enough to drop the cabin, and everything under it." "I know a guy," Nora whispered grimly. "Give me 20 minutes. Calvin hung up and got to work. He gathered what tools he had: fuel canisters, leftover construction-grade charges from a rock-clearing job years ago, and the old detonation wire he kept just in case. By the time Nora arrived in a rusted pickup truck, headlights off, the ridge trembled beneath them. The hum was constant now. The wrongness in the air had become a pressure, like a migraine in reality itself. They worked in silence. Nora wired the charges while Calvin soaked the foundation with diesel. As he set the last explosive under the porch beams, he paused, hand hovering over the timer. This was his home, his legacy. Every board and screw laid by his own hand. A place built in defiance of corporate sprawl and HOA madness. Now he had to burn it to the ground. Nora watched him from the edge of the clearing. "You okay?" "No," Calvin said, "but I'm ready." Just then, headlights. From the woods, a sleek black SUV roared up the path, tires carving through dirt. Doors slammed. Miranda stepped out, flanked by 2 men in suits. She looked furious. "Calvin!" she called out, calm but commanding. "This isn't your decision to make. He held up the detonator. Wrong. This is the only decision that's ever actually been mine. You don't understand what's down there." "I understand enough," he said. "You want to turn this into a development project. Build around a gateway to God knows where. You think you can monetize it, manage it." She stepped closer. "We've been studying it for decades. We can control it, contain it." "No, you can't," Calvin said. "You've already lost control. That thing's waking up." Behind them, the trees began to shimmer, like heat waves on pavement. The ground moaned, the sound deep and seismic. Miranda's expression cracked. "You don't know what you're doing." Calvin stared at her, quiet for a beat. Then, "Neither do you," and he pressed the trigger. Boom! The ridge erupted in flame and fury. A blinding explosion that tore the cabin from its moorings and swallowed the trees in a deafening roar. The ground convulsed as smoke billowed skyward and the ancient shaft collapsed inward, rock and metal devouring itself in a violent implosion. The hum stopped, just like that. The silence afterward was almost worse. Hours later, fire crews arrived. The gas leak story spread fast. No one mentioned the explosion's real cause. The shaft was buried. The HOA building mysteriously caught fire later that night. Miranda vanished. No trace. No forwarding address. Calvin left the ridge with nothing, except peace, and a story no one would ever believe. But every so often, when the wind blew through the ashes, he swore he could still hear it hum.